Imagine living in a town so quiet that the loudest thing you hear at night is the wind, until one day you realize the wind isn't what's whispering. Because this story isn't about ghosts. It's about a family that turned their own home into a prison, then convinced an entire town to help them keep the key. And by the time anyone understood what was happening upstairs, it was already too late. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from right now? Are you alone in your car, in bed with the lights off? If you're new here, subscribe, turn on the notification bell and comment your city, because stories like this don't just disturb you, they follow you. Now, let's go back to 1904, to a hill outside a New England town where a house stood like a warning no one wanted to read. The people of Briar Hollow, Maine didn't call it a mansion, not out loud. They called it the Sedgwick House when they were feeling polite. And when they weren't, when the snow packed in the corners of the streets and the evening got too long, they called it the Hill House, the Black Roof, the place you don't go unless you want to bring something back with you. It sat above the town on a ridge of pine and stone, like a brooding thought you couldn't shake. Built in 1871 by Edmund Sedgwick, it had the kind of architecture that looked impressive from a distance and suffocating up close. Steep gables, dark clapboard, narrow windows that reflected the sky like blank eyes. In the spring of 1904, the Sedgwick family became smaller, then quieter, then invisible. Edmund had died years before, and his wife, Agatha Sedgwick, followed him after a winter illness that never truly left. The funeral was private, short, efficient. The town's pastor, Reverend Lyle Mercer, remembered two things about it. First, the sisters wore identical black veils, the kind that made them look like matching silhouettes. Second, they held hands the entire time, not like grieving daughters, like two people clinging to the same ledge. Their names were Evelyn Sedgwick, 36, and Clara Sedgwick, 31. Everyone in Briar Hollow knew them, but no one could claim to know them well. Evelyn had a sharpness to her, tall, rigid posture, hair pinned back so tightly it made her look carved out of discipline. Clara was softer, shorter, nervous in a way that made people speak more gently around her without realizing they were doing it. They rarely came to town, and when they did, they moved together, always together. At the general store, Cal Hartman kept a ledger of every Sedgwick purchase, mostly because the orders were so consistent they started to feel unnatural. Flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, lamp oil, and every single week, enough food for 4. 2 women can't eat like that, Cal said one morning while setting jars of pickles onto the shelf. His wife shrugged. Maybe they're storing it. For what? A war. She laughed, but it came out thin, because there were only 2 reasons you stored food like that. You were preparing for a siege, or you were feeding someone nobody knew existed. That was the rumor, of course. It always becomes a rumor first. In Briar Hollow, the rumor had a name, Jonah. Some people said the Sedgwicks had a brother. Others swore there had been a boy years ago, always sick, always kept indoors. Old-timers mentioned seeing a child through the upstairs curtains once in a while, just a pale shape disappearing the moment anyone looked too long. Reverend Mercer didn't like those conversations. They felt like sin disguised as curiosity. But even he had to admit something. After Agatha's funeral, the Sedgwick house stopped receiving visitors entirely. Deliveries were left at the gate at the base of the hill. No one walked the winding path up unless invited, and nobody was invited. If a neighbor tried to bring a casserole or offer help, Evelyn would appear at the door like a figure pressed from shadow, accept the dish without stepping outside, and close the door before any real words could find air. Then came the sound that changed everything, the hammering. It started in late October during a stretch of gray weather that made the daylight feel weak. People heard it from town, distant, rhythmic, like a heartbeat being forced into something dead. It went on for 3 days. 3 days of construction sounds coming from a house nobody was allowed to enter. And on the 4th day, 2 men from a neighboring county drank themselves brave at the tavern and admitted they'd been hired for the job. They hadn't wanted to talk about it, but secrets don't stay quiet in rural places. They ferment. The 2 men were Wesley Pike and Harold Dunn, both carpenters, both the kind of men who'd seen hard winters and learned to keep their opinions to themselves, until the whiskey was enough. "It was the attic," Wesley said, staring into his glass like the answer was at the bottom. "They had us work in the attic." Someone at the bar leaned in. "What did they do? Renovate?" Wesley shook his head slowly. "They had us reinforce the door frame, then install locks. Not 1 lock, not 2, 3. That got attention. Harold cleared his throat and added, "Heavy locks, the kind you don't put on a closet." "Why?" someone asked. Harold's mouth opened, then closed again. "Because the real answer didn't sound like something you said in public." Wesley finally spoke. "We weren't allowed to look around. Evelyn stood there the entire time, watching, like if we turned the wrong way, the air would break." "Did you see anyone?" another voice pushed. Wesley hesitated just long enough for the whole tavern to lean forward. "No," he said, "but I heard." He stopped, swallowed, then forced the words out, breathing, heavy, like a man trying not to be heard. Silence snapped into place. A laugh tried to form at the end of the bar, someone's nervous habit, but it died halfway. Harold rubbed his palms on his trousers. "And the windows," he added. "They made us board the windows from the inside." "Da! From the inside," Cal Hartman echoed, too loud. Harold nodded. "Yeah, like whatever was up there wasn't supposed to see out." That night, Briar Hollow went to sleep with a new kind of fear. Not the fear of the dark, the fear of what somebody was doing in it. Evelyn knew the rumors were spreading. Of course she did. She wasn't a fool. The next Saturday, when she and Clara came to town at dawn, before the streets properly warmed with movement, Evelyn's eyes tracked people like she was counting them. Counting who stared, counting who looked away too quickly. Clara kept her gaze down, hands tucked into her sleeves, shoulders curled inward, like the world itself was too loud. At the apothecary, they bought bandages and antiseptic. At the butcher, they bought more meat than 2 women needed. At the general store, they bought lamp oil and rope. When Cal handed over the rope, his fingers paused on it by accident. It was a moment of instinct, a moment that said, "I notice." Evelyn didn't react right away. She just looked at him. And when she spoke, her voice was calm enough to be terrifying. "You're a good man, Mr. Hartman," she said softly. "So I'm going to give you advice." Cal swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "Some doors," Evelyn said, "are locked for a reason." Then she took the rope and walked out. Outside, the air smelled like frost. Clara followed half a step behind, and for a moment she glanced back at Cal. Her eyes were wet, not angry, not cruel, just exhausted. Cal watched them disappear down the street like 2 black stitches closing something that should have stayed open. That evening, Reverend Mercer sat in his study with a cup of cooling tea and tried to pray. He tried to pray for the sisters, for their grief, for their loneliness. But another thought kept intruding, sharp, unwanted. What if they aren't alone? It wasn't a holy thought, it was a human one, and it didn't leave him. So on Sunday afternoon, with the sky pale and the wind harsh, Reverend Mercer did what he'd been avoiding for months. He walked to the ridge. The path to Sedgwick House felt longer than it should have been. Pines crowded the trail like watchers. The house grew larger with each step, its windows reflecting dull light without offering warmth. When he reached the porch, he noticed something immediately. The front door had fresh scratches near the handle. not random, not weathered, as if something had been dragged against it recently. He knocked once, waited, knocked again, waited longer. Finally, the door opened a crack. Evelyn's face appeared in the gap, pale and severe. "Reverend," she said, like the word had dust on it. "I came to check on you," he replied gently. "It's been a long time." "We're fine." He tried to smile. "Grief can make people disappear. I understand that. But your mother would have wanted—" From somewhere above them, deep inside the house, came a sound. A dull thud. Then a long scrape. Slow, heavy, like something being moved across wood. The Reverend froze. Evelyn didn't, but the muscles in her jaw tightened so sharply it looked painful. Another sound followed, not a scream, not a whisper. A voice, low, rough and stretched thin by disuse. And though Reverend Mercer couldn't make the words clearly, he understood the emotion in it. It was the sound of a human being remembering they still had a throat. Evelyn's hand shifted behind the door. The Reverend caught the glint of something metal. "You should go," Evelyn said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were not. "If someone is hurt," he began. Evelyn leaned closer into the crack of the door. And for the first time, Reverend Mercer felt something far colder than winter press against his spine. "You should go," she repeated, each word sharpened. "Now!" He backed away one step, then another. The door slammed. The sound rolled down the ridge and into the trees like a warning bell. Reverend Mercer stood on the porch, heart pounding, breath white in the air. He told himself he was imagining things. He told himself old houses made noises. He told himself it wasn't his place. But the part of him that mattered, the part that still believed in right and wrong, whispered one unavoidable truth. Someone inside that house had just tried to speak, and Evelyn Sedgwick had done everything in her power to make sure nobody listened. That night, Briar Hollow slept under a sky full of hard stars, and in the Sedgwick attic, behind 3 locks, someone moved in the dark, slowly, quietly, like they'd been practicing silence for years. The first outsider to truly notice something was wrong at the Sedgwick house did not come from Briar Hollow. That, in hindsight, made all the difference. His name was Daniel Cho. He arrived in the spring of 1906, carrying everything he owned in 2 weathered trunks and a mind trained to observe details most people ignored. Unlike the farmhands and lumber workers who passed through the region, Daniel was not looking for temporary work. He was building something permanent, a small farm, a future. Daniel had spent 12 years moving across America, working wherever opportunity cracked open just enough to slip through. Rail yards, canneries, fields. He saved relentlessly, endured quietly, and asked for very little. When he purchased a narrow stretch of land east of Briar Hollow, the townspeople watched him with polite distance. Not hostility, not warmth either, but Daniel didn't mind. He'd learned long ago that silence could be safer than attention. From his property, the ridge was visible. At first, the house on top of it was nothing more than a shape against the sky, a dark geometry cutting into clouds. Daniel noticed it the way a carpenter notices a crooked beam, instinctively. He didn't ask about it, not yet. Weeks passed. He worked his land from sunrise to dusk, planting vegetables that thrived in colder soil. His produce stood out at the Saturday market. Crisp greens, thick roots, unfamiliar herbs that drew curious glances. Daniel noticed patterns. Who bought what, who came early, who avoided eye contact. That's how he noticed the sisters. They arrived just after dawn, always together, always dressed in dark fabric that seemed to swallow light. One carried the basket, the other spoke. Evelyn did the talking. Clara did the counting. Daniel watched them purchase the same items week after week, in quantities that quietly defied logic. Heavy blankets in late spring, medical supplies with no visible patient. Enough food to sustain multiple adults. When they reached his stall for the first time, Evelyn examined his produce carefully, like she was assessing risk rather than freshness. "These are good," she said. "Picked this morning," Daniel replied. "They help with strength and pain." Evelyn's eyes flicked up, just for a moment. "Pain," she repeated. She bought nearly half his stock. As Clara paid, Daniel noticed bruises on her wrists, faded but unmistakable. The kind left by repeated gripping, not accidents. "Are you hurt?" he asked gently. Clara startled like a bird. Evelyn's gaze hardened instantly. "My sister is well," she said. "We value discretion." Daniel nodded, backing off immediately. Of course, no offense meant. Evelyn held his eyes a second longer than necessary. Then she leaned in slightly. "See that you remember," she said. They left without another word. That night, Daniel stood on his porch and looked toward the ridge. Lights flickered in the attic, not steady, moving, as if someone carried a single candle through darkness. Daniel did not speak of it. He knew better. Immigrants who brought trouble rarely received fairness in return. So he watched quietly, recording nothing but memory. Until the night he saw them digging. It was just after midnight. The moon was thin, barely enough to silver the tree line. Daniel had stepped outside for air when movement caught his eye. 2 lanterns, descending the ridge. The sisters moved slowly toward the old cemetery, bordering their land. Daniel watched as they began digging near the trees, working methodically, silently. They worked for over an hour. Then they covered the hole and returned up the hill. Daniel did not sleep. By morning, he knew something was very wrong. At the next market, he approached Evelyn again. "Miss Sedgwick," he said quietly, careful to keep his tone respectful. "Some of the plants I grow are used in medicine. If someone in your household is unwell, I could help." Evelyn studied him, not with anger, with calculation. "What makes you think someone is unwell?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, then chose honesty. "The supplies you buy, the food, and I can see your house from my land." A silence stretched between them. Around them, the market buzzed with ordinary life, laughter, bargaining, gossip. Evelyn finally spoke. "You are observant," she said, "and that is dangerous." Daniel met her gaze. "Sometimes." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Forget what you've seen for your own safety." She turned and left, guiding Clara away with urgency that bordered on panic. That night, Daniel made a decision, one that would cost him everything. He walked to the Sedgwick house in daylight. The house felt wrong up close. The air smelled stale, layered with something sickly beneath the dust. Clara answered the door, pale and shaking. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Please go." "I brought vegetables," Daniel replied, "and concern." Evelyn appeared behind her sister, thinner than before, eyes hollowed by exhaustion. "You were warned," she said. "I can't ignore this," Daniel replied. "If someone is being hurt—" "You understand nothing," Evelyn snapped. He stepped inside anyway. The air grew heavier with every step. They climbed the stairs, then the narrow staircase to the attic. Evelyn unlocked 3 heavy locks. The door opened. The smell nearly drove Daniel to his knees. And then he saw him, a man chained to the wall, emaciated, bearded, eyes painfully alive. "This," Evelyn said softly, "is our brother, Nathaniel Sedgwick." The man made a sound, half word, half plea. Daniel's voice barely worked. "Why?" Evelyn's composure cracked. "He killed our parents," she whispered, "and we promised to protect him." "This isn't protection," Daniel said. "This is all we have," Clara sobbed. Daniel backed away, heart racing. "Let me help you," he said. Evelyn stepped between him and the door. "I'm sorry," she said. The iron poker struck his temple. Darkness swallowed him. When Daniel Cho did not appear at the market again, people noticed. When his farm sat abandoned, people whispered. They found his basket at the base of the ridge, empty, and the town of Briar Hollow, once again, chose not to ask questions it didn't want answered. But someone else was coming, and she would not look away. By the autumn of 1909, the world was changing faster than Briar Hollow could keep up with. Electric lines crept toward nearby towns. Newspapers arrived with stories of cities growing upward instead of outward. Doctors spoke of new ideas: public health, prevention, care beyond prayer. And that was how Margaret Hale arrived in Briar Hollow. She was 26, recently certified as a county visiting nurse, sent to rural communities where illness thrived in silence. Margaret believed deeply in her work. She wore practical skirts, carried notebooks filled with observations, and asked questions most people avoided. The clerk at the town hall mentioned the Sedgwick sisters almost as an afterthought. "They're not officially assigned," he said, flipping through papers, "but they live up on the ridge, alone. Wouldn't hurt to check on them." Margaret wrote the name down. Something about it felt heavy. The path up the ridge was lined with turning leaves, gold and rust crunching beneath her boots. The house appeared gradually, like a thought forming you wished you could stop. Margaret knocked. Minutes passed. She knocked again. Finally, the door opened. Clara stood there, thinner than Margaret expected, eyes glassy with exhaustion. "We don't need help," Clara said immediately. Margaret smiled gently. "I'm not here because you asked. I'm here because the county worries." Evelyn appeared behind her sister. Tall, severe, controlled. Margaret felt it instantly. This woman was carrying something enormous, and it was crushing her. "We are well," Evelyn said. Margaret didn't argue. She stepped inside. The house smelled of neglect and something older. Dust lay thick on every surface. Curtains blocked most of the daylight. Margaret conducted basic examinations. Evelyn was malnourished, her blood pressure dangerously high. Clara trembled constantly, speaking to people who weren't there when she thought no one noticed. "You're caring for someone else," Margaret said quietly. The room went still. "That's none of your concern," Evelyn snapped. A sound interrupted them from above, low, human, a voice. Margaret stood. "That isn't the wind," she said. Clara began to cry. Evelyn's face drained of color. "You need to leave," she said. "I can't," Margaret replied. "Someone upstairs needs help." She moved for the stairs. Evelyn grabbed her arm. Margaret shook her off. "I'll return with the sheriff if you stop me." The sisters looked at each other. Years of shared terror passed between them without words. Finally, Clara nodded. Evelyn produced the keys. 3 locks. The door opened. The smell hit Margaret like a physical blow. Years of abandonment, chains, and a man barely alive. "Nathaniel," Clara whispered. Margaret knelt beside him, examining what was left of his body. "This is torture," she said softly. Evelyn's voice broke. "We promised." Margaret backed away slowly. "I need time," she said. "You can't continue like this." She left the house shaking. That night she wrote 3 reports and tore them all up. 2 days later she returned. The front door stood open. The house was empty. The attic door swung wide. The chains hung loose. They were gone. All of them. Margaret Hale reported what she knew the very next morning. She sat across from Sheriff Andrew Collier in his narrow office above the general store. Hands clasped so tightly, her knuckles had turned white. She told him everything. About the condition of the house, the man in chains, the sister's confession, and the moment she returned to find the place empty. Collier listened without interruption. When she finished, he leaned back slowly, removing his hat. "How long?" he asked. "More than 30 years, Margaret said. "They've been carrying him since childhood." Collier closed his eyes. Briar Hollow was not prepared for that kind of truth. By afternoon, the sheriff had assembled a small search party. He kept it quiet. No telegrams, no newspapers. He understood what panic could do to a town like this. They searched the Sedgwick house first. Up close, the neglect was undeniable. In the attic, the chains hung loose against the wall, grooves worn into the floor from decades of movement. Dr. Edgar Lowell, who had delivered the Sedgwick children years earlier, examined the space with a hollow look. He was ill, Lowell said quietly, severely. Institutional care was the only option even then, but the parents refused. Did he kill them? Collier asked. Lowell nodded. Yes, in a psychotic episode. I examined the bodies myself. They moved outside. Near the old cemetery, the ground had been disturbed. 3 shallow graves, 2 older, 1 newer. Margaret recognized the pattern immediately. They kept everyone together, she whispered, even in death. Winter closed in fast that year. Snow fell early, burying trails and swallowing sound. But the search continued, through abandoned barns, logging roads and frozen creeks. Then came the first sighting. A farmer north of town reported 3 figures crossing his land at night, 2 women and a man between them, barely moving, dragging. They didn't ask for help, the farmer said. Didn't even look at me. Collier knew then. They were heading north, toward the border. The pursuit became a race against the cold. Tracks appeared and vanished. Campsites told stories of desperation, discarded blankets, blood in the snow, a message scratched into a tree with trembling hands. We tried, no names, no explanations, just regret. By January, they found them, collapsed in an abandoned barn, bodies pressed together for warmth. Nathaniel was already gone. Margaret felt it the moment she touched him. Evelyn looked up at the sheriff with hollow eyes. It's finished, she whispered. We kept the promise. They were brought back to Briar Hollow, wrapped in blankets, barely alive. Evelyn died 3 days later of pneumonia. Her last words, spoken to Margaret, were simple. Tell them, we loved him. Clara survived, but she never spoke again. The official records closed the Sedgwick case in the spring of 1910. They did so quietly. No trial, no headlines, no public reckoning. Sheriff Andrew Collier understood that some truths, once spoken aloud, would fracture Briar Hollow beyond repair. The deaths were documented. The facts were filed away. The town was allowed to breathe again, even if the air tasted wrong. Evelyn Sedgwick was buried without ceremony. Clara was transferred to the state hospital for the mentally infirm in Augusta, where she lived another 16 years. She never spoke again, but nurses reported that she often sang hymns late at night, her voice thin and fragile, as if it might shatter if pushed too hard. Nathaniel's remains were laid to rest in an unmarked grave. For the town, that should have been the end. But houses remember. The Sedgwick house sat empty for over 2 decades, its windows dark, its roof slowly sagging under the weight of neglect. Children dared each other to touch the gate at the base of the hill. Adults avoided the path entirely. Inside, dust gathered like snowfall, and behind a loose panel in the attic wall, something waited. In 1934, the property went to auction. That was how Thomas and Eleanor Finch came to Briar Hollow. They were from Boston, educated, skeptical, and deeply convinced that stories lost their power when exposed to reason. Thomas was a writer, struggling to finish a novel. Eleanor was a painter, fascinated by decay and forgotten spaces. They bought the house for almost nothing. "This place has good bones," Thomas said, standing on the porch the day they arrived. Eleanor wasn't so sure. Something about the attic made her uneasy, though she couldn't articulate why. Renovation took nearly a year. Walls were scrubbed, windows replaced, floors reinforced. But when they reached the attic, the workers refused to continue. "It's the air," one man said. "Feels wrong." Thomas dismissed it, until a carpenter named Samuel Reed, a lifelong resident of Briar Hollow, found something behind the wall. A journal, leather-bound, water-stained, still legible. The handwriting was precise, controlled. The first entry was dated April 14th, 1897. Mother is gone. Father is gone. Nathaniel did this. We should call for help, but Mother made me promise. She made me swear I would never let them take him away. I don't know if this is love or cowardice. I only know I said yes. Eleanor read in silence as the pages unfolded a nightmare written one day at a time. The fake funeral, the chains, the hunger, the disappearance of a man named Daniel Cho. The later entries dissolved into fragments. We don't sleep anymore. The house listens. The promise won't let us rest. The final entry was dated days before their flight north. If anyone reads this, know that we loved him. Know that we gave everything. Know that the promise cost us our lives long before the cold ever did. Eleanor closed the journal with shaking hands. This house isn't cursed, she said. It's grieving. They donated the journal to the main historical archive, where scholars debated its meaning for years. Were the sisters monsters, or victims of impossible choices? The house was renovated fully. The attic became a studio filled with light, and for a time it seemed like the past had finally loosened its grip. But some echoes don't fade. They wait. For several years, the Sedgwick house felt almost ordinary. Laughter replaced silence. Paintings lined the walls. Guests came and went, admiring the view from the ridge and commenting on how peaceful the place felt. Thomas Finch finished his novel there. Eleanor painted late into the night beneath the attic skylights. If the house remembered its past, it kept quiet. At first. The first sound came during Eleanor's third winter in the attic studio. She was alone, working by lamplight while snow drifted past the glass. It was late, well past midnight, when she heard it. A soft, rhythmic noise. Not the wind, not the house settling. It sounded like breathing. She froze, brush hovering above the canvas. The sound stopped. Eleanor told herself it was nothing. Old houses were full of tricks. But the sounds returned, sometimes at night, sometimes at dawn, always faint, always human. Thomas dismissed it when she mentioned it over breakfast. Memory, he said. The mind fills silence with meaning. Eleanor wanted to believe him. Then came the scratching. It came from inside the walls. Light, deliberate, almost thoughtful, like someone testing the boundary between presence and absence. They called in a contractor. He found nothing, no animals, no structural issues, no explanation. But when he removed a section of paneling in the attic, the air shifted. It smelled wrong, old, buried. Eleanor felt it instantly. Stop, she said. The contractor shrugged and replaced the panel. That night, Eleanor dreamed of chains clinking softly in the dark. She woke with a word in her mouth she didn't remember learning. Promise. In the spring of 1939, Eleanor stopped sleeping altogether. The sounds had grown clearer. Sometimes she could almost make out words, never whole sentences, just fragments carried on breath and regret. Thomas heard them too now. He didn't deny it anymore. They searched the house again, opening walls, inspecting beams. Behind one section in the attic, they found marks etched into the wood. Fingernail marks, countless, layered. Thomas ran his fingers over them and pulled back as if burned. This isn't imagination, he said quietly. They consulted records at the historical archive, reread the journal. Patterns emerged, dates matched, moon phases aligned. The sounds always returned near the anniversary of the family's flight. Eleanor came to a terrible realization. This house isn't haunted, she said. It's remembering. Memory had soaked into the walls like water into stone. Years of suffering compressed into space, and now that space was releasing it. They made a decision. They would acknowledge it, not deny it, not erase it. On a cold night in November, they lit candles in the attic and read the journal aloud. Every word, every confession, every regret. The house creaked softly around them. The sounds faded. For the first time in years, the attic fell silent. Eleanor wept. Thomas held her. They believed it was over. They were wrong, because silence in houses like this is never peace. It's waiting. The sounds never returned the way Eleanor feared they would, not as breathing, not as scratching, not as voices trying to claw their way back into the world. Instead, the house changed. It didn't grow warm. It didn't grow kind. It simply settled. As if something that had been holding its breath for decades had finally exhaled. Eleanor said it felt like standing beside a grave after the final shovel of dirt had been placed. The grief didn't vanish, but it stopped demanding attention every second. Thomas never wrote another novel. He said the house had already told the only story that mattered. They stayed in the Sedgwick house for over 30 years. They hosted dinners. They raised children. They filled the rooms with music, arguments, laughter, and ordinary life. The kind of life that had been denied to everyone who once suffered there. In the attic, Eleanor painted. Always themes of confinement and release. Windows, doors, hands reaching toward light. Visitors loved the space. They said it felt inspiring. They never asked why Eleanor refused to hang mirrors there. Margaret Hale never returned to Briar Hollow, but she followed the house's history from a distance. In a letter written shortly before her death in 1948, she confessed something she had never said aloud. "I used to believe every tragedy had a correct solution if only someone acted sooner. Now I know some situations are so broken that all we can do is bear witness and hope that remembering prevents repetition." She died believing that. Clara Sedgwick died in the state hospital without speaking another word. The nurses said she sometimes sang hymns late at night. Always the same one, always the verse about forgiveness. Nathaniel Sedgwick was remembered nowhere officially, no plaque, no marker. But in the town cemetery, 3 simple stones appeared one spring, placed quietly by someone no one ever saw arrive. They bore only names, no accusations, no explanations. Today, the Sedgwick house still stands. It is a bed and breakfast now, praised for its views and quiet charm. Guests ask about its history. The owners tell them it's old, that families once lived there. That time leaves marks. They do not mention chains, they do not mention promises. And when guests say they hear noises at night, old wood settling, wind in the eaves, the owners smile gently and say the same thing people have always said when truth feels inconvenient. Just the house. Maybe they're right, or maybe some stories don't end. They don't need to scream anymore, they don't need to frighten. They only need to exist, quietly reminding us of what happens when love becomes obligation, when duty replaces mercy, and when promises made in grief outlive the people who made them. The Sedgwick sisters believed they were protecting their brother. They never abandoned him. They never broke their word. Whether that makes them monsters or martyrs is not for history to decide. It's for each of us. Standing in a bright attic where chains once hung, listening to the quiet, and asking ourselves a question that never really leaves. How far would you go to keep a promise, even if keeping it destroyed you? If this story stayed with you, tell us in the comments where you're listening from and what you think the sisters truly were. And if you want more stories like this, stories that feel uncomfortably real, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the most disturbing stories are rarely about evil. They're about love without wisdom, and houses that remember.